Hi, this is Caroline, and this is our chicken anatomy project.
My name is Gabbi DelBello,
And I'm Ankur Madaan.
and our chicken is Nugget. We're going to start with external anatomy. On our chicken, you can see the comb and the wattle, which both provide as an ornamental function. They both vary in shape and size across different species. The size and color are dependent on the sex hormones. For example, more testosterone means a bigger comb and wattle, more estrogen means a darker red pigmentation. You can also see the earlobe, which is just the modification of the skins, and the oral cavity can be seen in the bottom left. Here you can see the feathers on our chicken. They are composed of keratin, and they shield the skin from damage as well as provide insulation. You can see the axial feather noted in the picture, which just separates all the feathers. Here you can see the brachial vein. It is found under the wing between the biceps brachialis and the triceps humerus, and it is often used for blood collection due to its large size. Here you can see the uropygial gland. It is a large bilobe sebaceous gland found dorsally at the base of the tail, and it secretes oil, which aids in waterproofing the feathers.
Now we're moving on to digestive anatomy. And so starting off, we have the mouth, beak, and tongue. And for chickens, the mouth does not contain teeth, and it has a beak instead of lips. The beak is used to tear and hold food, and then they have a triangular shaped tongue with many touch receptors instead of taste buds. And then we have the esophagus, and the crop comes next. The esophagus is a muscular tube that runs dorsal to the trachea. It carries food from the mouth to the crop, and then the crop provides a place for food storage before entry into the first stomach, which is the proventriculus. Next, after the food goes from the crop, it goes into the proventriculus, which is a glandular stomach that secretes hydrochloric acid for the process of chemical digestion. And then digested material is then transferred from the proventriculus into the gizzard, which is the site of mechanical digestion. And the gizzard has sandpaper-like inner walls and a strong muscular contractions that help to crush and mix food, especially hard foods and like rocks that the chicken may eat. After food material exits the gizzard, it enters the small intestine. And the small intestine absorbs nutrients from food, and it is made up of three parts: the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. And the small intestine is fixed to the abdominal wall via the mesentery. And part of the small intestine is the duodenal loop, which contains the pancreas. And the pancreas produces insulin, glucagon, and pancreatic juice containing enzymes for digestion, like trypsinogen and chymotrypsinogen. And then the food then exits the small intestine and enters the large intestines. And the large intestine is a site for water absorption. And connected to the large intestine are the intestinal ceca, which absorb water again and contain bacteria that allow poultry to digest cellulose, the carbohydrate cellulose in plants. The liver and gallbladder. The liver is a large four-lobe gland in the abdomen, and the liver processes blood from intestines and stomach. It produces bile, metabolizes drugs, is a site for lipid mobilization and gluconeogenesis. And the gallbladder will store bile produced in the liver and secrete it into the duodenum of the small intestine to help with digestion. The cloaca is the last portion of the digestive and reproductive tracts of the chicken. Fecal matter and eggs are ejected from the chicken through the vent of the cloaca.
So, onto the reproductive anatomy of the chicken. We can start by looking at the initial view of the reproductive tract once the chicken is cut open. And here you can compare the size of the ovary to the rest of the bird. So here in this picture, we can see clearly the F1, F2, and F3 follicles. The F1 is the largest follicle, and it will be the first one to travel through the reproductive tract, followed by the F2 follicle and then the F3 follicle. Here we can see the entire view of the reproductive tract and how it connects to the digestive system. So once the egg's deposited into the reproductive tract, it spends the most time in the shell gland. And we can see the ovaries are attached to the infundibulum. And from there, the ovary goes into the magnum, into the isthmus, into the shell gland where the hard shell's put up over the ovary. And then finally it goes into the vagina and exits the body through the vent. While dissecting our chicken, a follicle had fallen and was sitting in the body cavity. And you can see there it started to decompose and it changed color. The rooster reproductive tract is a little bit different from the chicken tract. So we can see here the male reproductive tract is a lot smaller and compact compared to the chicken. And the testes connect to the vas deferens, which directly connect to the cloaca, which exit through the vent. So the rooster and the chicken will have a cloacal kiss where the sperm's deposited into the chicken's cloaca, and it can actually be stored in the oviduct for a period of time. Onto the urogenital system, we can see that the kidneys actually attach to the reproductive tract, and the ureter terminates into the cloaca. The kidneys help to remove nitrogenous waste through the form of urea, and they also help to keep an osmotic pressure of the fluids in balance. And as well as that, they also remove a majority of the metabolic wastes. So here in the kidney, you can see it's a 3-lobed structure. The tubules run from the cranial and medial lobe, and they terminate in the cloaca. The adrenal glands located anterior and dorsally of the most anterior lobe, and also chickens do not have a bladder.
On to the muscular system. Starting off with the wing, in this image you can see the biceps brachii, which flex the elbow joint. Underneath you could see the triceps brachii, which extend the elbow joint. Next you could see the leg of the chicken. Starting in the top left, you can see the sartorius, which flexes the hip and extends the knee. Moving on to the quadriceps femoris, which is an extension of the thigh. You can see the M. ambiens, which we were told we did not need to know. Next, you could see the tibialis anterior, which flexes the tarsometatarsus forward. Next, the adductor longus adducts and extends the thigh. The semimembranosus extends the thigh and flexes the knee. And the gastrocnemius flexes the knee and extends the foot. Moving on to the thigh, you can see the iliotibialis, which flexes the hip and extends the knee. You can see the sartorius, which also flexes the hip and extends the knee. You can see the semitendinosus, which extends the thigh, the semimembranosus, which extends the thigh and flexes the knee, as well as the gastrocnemius, which flexes the knee and extends the foot. Moving on to the breasts, the superficial pectoral provides the downward movement of the wing. In contrast, the supracoracoideus elevates the wing in the upstroke. Moving on to the circulatory system, you can see the pericardial sac in the top left photograph. The pericardial sac is the fibrous tissue surrounding the heart. On the bottom left, you can see the 4 chambers of the heart. The right atrium receives oxygen-poor blood from the body and pumps to the right ventricle. The left atrium receives oxygen-rich blood from the lungs and pumps to the left ventricle. The right ventricle pumps oxygen-poor blood to the lungs, and the left ventricle pumps oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body. In the bottom right, you could see the heart while still intact with the rest of the bird.
So, onto the respiratory system of the chicken. Here we can see the general anatomy. And the trachea is the main tube which transports air to and from the lungs. And it's also lined with mucus, which helps to filter contaminants such as pathogens and dust from entering the lungs. The lungs are responsible for all air exchange, and they also help to cool down the chicken. The glottis is it controls airflow in and out of the respiratory passages, and it's seated on the caudal end of the larynx. And then the syrinx is the vocal organ of all birds. So here we can see the airway path in detail. So in step 1, the inhalation brings air into the posterior air sacs. And on step 2, the chicken exhales and the air is drawn from the lungs into the lungs from the posterior air sacs. And on the third step, the chicken inhales again and the air moves from the lungs into the anterior air sacs. And then on the final exhalation, the air is moved from the anterior air sacs into the trachea and then finally expelled. Some functions of the lungs include oxygen absorption and removal of carbon dioxide. It also helps to cool the core temperature. Chickens also don't have a diaphragm, and instead they rely on their intercostal muscles for contraction of their lungs. And they also have 9 total air sacs.
And that concludes our presentation on chicken anatomy. And we would like to give a special thank you to our chicken Nugget for donating her body to science.